The premise of the book is we've got this guy who's a Hitchcock obsessive. He's got this Hitchcock themed hotel, and he decides on the 1 year anniversary of his hotel's opening, he's going to invite these old college friends that he hasn't seen in a year to come stay with him for a weekend for free. We know he's got some unfinished business with them. He doesn't seem to have their welfare at heart, but we don't know exactly why or what he's got in store. And so we have these five other friends. Five, yeah, there's six of them total. So there's five other friends who come in. And to your point about like building out the supporting cast, when I started out, I was like, how am I going to keep these people straight in my head, let alone in the reader's head? I was really worried about this character soup effect where you just kind of are switching POVs constantly and don't know who's who, because I should have started with, I wanted each character to have their own POV in the book. And so what I did was I have always been fascinated with the seven deadly sins, and I decided each sin was going to be a stand-in for the character, their job, their biggest weakness, until I could make them my own and make them feel real. And so, we start out the book with Samira, who represents lust. She has a sex toy company, and she's kind of like the good friend to everybody. And Zoe, who is a chef. She represents gluttony. She struggled with alcoholism. And as we continue on, I kind of let you get situated in these three POVs with Alfred, Samira, and Zoe. And then as we continue on, we keep adding in characters. So Julius is Sloth. He's this trust fund kid who's never worked a day in his life and is sort of like the court jester of the group. We have TJ, who's a bodyguard. He represents wrath, and he's kind of got these demons that are catching up with him. He's at the hotel trying to escape. And then finally, we have Grace, who is greed. She's a hedge fund manager. And she's kind of, you get the sense like sort of was a mastermind of the group in college, sort of the ringleader. And so they all get wound in through the story. A death occurs halfway through the book, and then we spend the second half of the book trying to figure out who did it and why. It wasn't a specific place in my mind. It was more the concept of a Hitchcock themed something. So originally where this started, I thought of a Hitchcock themed cruise because I had heard about like the Gillian Flynn cruise, like with Gone Girl. And I was like, oh, that's like a fascinating idea. And I was like, who's like a master of the genre that I could sort of toy around with. And contrary to most people's beliefs, I was not a huge Hitchcock fan before writing this book. I just kind of used it as an excuse to do a deep dive into his filmography, which I'd always wanted to do, but I'd never gotten around to. And so, I toyed around with the cruise thing and I was like, nah, it's been done. And I just thought like this themed hotel, and I just pictured it looking like not the Bates Motel, but the Bates family house from Psycho, sort of this like old Victorian, like on the hill. And it just felt so New England to me. I know that the movie was actually shot in California, Psycho, but to me, it felt very New England. And so I decided to set it in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. It just felt like the perfect setting for that kind of theme. So his name comes from his mother is a huge Hitchcock fan, and he watches Hitchcock movies with her growing up, and that's how he gets sort of brought into this world. She had these great ambitions of being sort of a Hitchcock blonde, even though she was a brunette, and then she marries Alfred's father, and that dream sort of falls apart. And so at the end of the day, what we're left with Alfred's childhood is that these two sort of lonely people just clinging to each other. It's funny that you mentioned how sort of creepy and diabolical he sounds because he was actually worse than what he ends up as in the book. But my editor brought up a great point, which was if this guy is like so creepy and off-putting, how could he possibly be running a successful bed and breakfast? Like who's going to come stay at this guy's place if he's like got no charm whatsoever? So I had to pull that back again and make him a little bit more like a member of the living and not just sort of this ghoulish figure. But he was another one going back to sort of the straight characters versus the off-center ones. He was just somebody who I was really excited to write from the very beginning. I just felt like I kind of knew him. It's really uncommon, unless you're a thriller author, to be a huge Hitchcock fan. If you're somebody, if you're a millennial or somebody in a younger generation. And so all of his interests and hobbies and just demeanor sort of lent itself well to this kind of story. I have started with, I actually, it's very nice of you to say that because setting is one of the things I've struggled with most in my writing. And I finally figured out the key is to have actual like photos or videos of real places that I can lean on because I find it much easier to just describe a photo versus describing I don't have as detailed visuals in my mind of a room as I do of a character or of a, of a scenario. Like the dialogue and action is what comes to me first, and the setting is usually not as well defined. So with the Hitchcock Hotel, once I did decide I wanted it to be set in New England, I first just drew like a very basic diagram of like where the guest rooms are and stuff. So I had it laid out correctly spatially. And then I found there's this hotel in Scotland called the Fife Arms, and it had this like very, old hunting lodge vibe. And so I saved a bunch of those photos to, a Pinterest board, and those were a lot of the inspiration for the rooms inside the Hitchcock Hotel, as well as I tried to use some of Hitchcock's actual setting scenery. So like my dining room was the same as the dining room in Rebecca, or there's a room in Rear Window that I tried to like pull into mine. So I tried to do a combo of Hitchcock's actual films and sort of this like Scottish hunting lodge, and that hopefully helped bring everything together.